The training I wish I knew about when I started as a young coach. What is it? Zone 2 cardio. What's up everyone? Jason Brown here, the king of programming. Today we're talking about Zone 2 cardio. It's the hot thing on social media. Everyone's talking about it now, which to me is crazy because I've been talking about this stuff for a long time, not to toot my own horn, but that's what it is. So, quick little story for you guys. I was a strength and conditioning coach that thought cardio was the devil. I used to think cardio would eat my gains as far as lean tissue. It would take away strength, power, all the things we don't want it to do, it would do. So I was taught to never do anything for more than a few minutes. Never go for a jog, don't do steady state cardio, so on and so forth. And guess what? I was dead wrong. Zone 2 cardio was the thing for me that was the catalyst for not only allowing me to write even better programs, but to get the best results that I had ever gotten with the clients I was working with, including myself. And to be honest, I don't think I'd be sitting here today talking to you if I didn't start including this into my programs and finding new ways to incorporate it. So back in 2015, I owned a CrossFit gym and we were competing to make regionals as a team, and adding the Zone 2 piece into our training, the cyclical piece, was really the catalyst for getting us to an even higher level, as well as people being able to get more from their strength into hypertrophy work, as well as obviously other things too, like power work. We were able to get a lot more from that stuff. And when I started programming for other gyms, this was such an integral piece of the puzzle. I found myself getting better results year after year in my own training because I had more an emphasis on the aerobic system, which is the system that is highly adaptable and allows us to build things like work capacity. It allows us to improve our ability to shuttle nutrients to working muscles, to deliver oxygen to working muscles, and things like cardiac output, which is a product of heart rate and stroke volume, will be improved when we do things like steady state cardio or aerobic work or whatever you want to call it. Zone 2, you can call it whatever you want, but what I want to make clear on this video today is we're going to talk about, number one, how do we do it? Number two, things that we want to potentially avoid. And then number three, how do we program it? What does it look like in our program? Where do we put it? Does it go at the end of a strength session? Does it go on its own day? Do we do it for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes? How long do we do this stuff? And how can we get the biggest bang for the buck? So there's a lot of things to unpack. One of the things that I see quite often on social media is that people throw Zone 2 on anything. So if you're doing conditioning, Zone 2 conditioning, and they're doing weightlifting, there are some reasons why that's not the best way to do it, which we're gonna talk about. So appreciate you guys sticking around for this video today. Let's get right into it. If you're like me and love optimizing your health and performance, love cookies and tacos, subscribe to my once weekly newsletter, EWOD. There's zero pressure, zero spamming to join, and a lot of value to gain. And as a special thank you, I'll send you a discount code to any of my training subscriptions. The link is in the description. See you on the inside. All right, guys, so let's talk about what is Zone 2 cardio. There's a lot of things that this can be called, but what we call it in our programming is aerobic conditioning, okay? So I think most people associate cardio with going to the gym and doing some steady state work, which is perfectly fine, but there are some things that we can do to make it more effective. So Zone 2 cardio is essentially doing work at a sustained pace, conversational, if you will, where if I was standing beside you and you were on a treadmill and I was on a treadmill, we'd be able to carry on a conversation. Okay, so that's kind of a key indicator for it. If we want to get a little bit deeper, we could be tracking our heart rate and staying in the 60 to 70% range or Zone 2. Okay, so those are key things to keep in mind as far as what it should feel like. Now, when we do Zone 2 cardio, the best way to do it is on a cyclical piece. Things like a treadmill, an air bike, a ski erg, a rower. Go down the list of pieces of cardio equipment that you have access to. Those things would be a great fit for that. Now, there are other things that potentially work too. So let's say you don't have access to that stuff. Maybe you have an air bike and then nothing else. You can use other things like jumping rope, maybe a light sled drag. So those things can certainly be put into the session and allow you to perform that style of work and keep things intact in terms of the output, in terms of things like blood pressure. So that's one way we can think of it and one way we can deliver it in an effective way. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why cyclical? Why can't I just do body weight exercises or even use some kettlebell work? The key component with this, as far as getting the correct adaptation, specifically in the heart, is number one, the heart rate has to be in the correct range, as I just mentioned. Number two, we need to keep blood pressure lower. When we have blood pressure rising, as we would with things like weightlifting, we have more constriction, less dilation, things that would potentially take away from the ability of the heart to pump more blood and have higher levels of cardiac output. So blood pressure needs to be kept lower, all right? So again, I think that people will try to put things in not knowing the impact that will take place when we have isometric contractions. But when we do have a lot of that, we potentially blunt some of the adaptations that we are looking for. Okay, so know that lifting weights faster and calling it zone 2 cardio is incorrect. And that's why it is incorrect. Now, if we think about even rises in blood pressure that we would typically see with weightlifting, or even doing weightlifting, lifting weights faster, if you will, there are things that happen differently in the heart as opposed to doing longer duration steady state. We have two different types of hypertrophy in the heart. One is more thickening or concentric hypertrophy, which takes place from weightlifting. You do a lot of weightlifting, you do no cardio, you're probably gonna get more concentric hypertrophy. Whereas people that are endurance athletes that do a ton of zone 2 work, they get more stretching, more cavity volume, more eccentric hypertrophy. So again, two very different things. Now, I'm not saying don't lift weights or just do one or the other. I believe that we should have a combination. We can get a lot if we have a combination of both resistance training as well as doing some aerobic work. And there's a lot of benefits and studies on that you can certainly look at. So that is an important piece of this. Now, how often do we do this work? Well, I think the first question to ask is, how often are you doing it currently? If you're doing it 0, then let's start with a minimum effective dose. Okay, we don't need to go with maximum. I am always a big believer in starting with the lowest effective dose. So for most of you, if you're doing 0, if you include a 30-minute session per week, one 30-minute session, you go to the gym and you do multiple pieces of cardio at a steady state, you will see an impact. Now, the question is for how long? Is it gonna last that way forever? Probably not. You will have to increase frequency and duration over time. But starting out with a low dose and seeing what happens, seeing how you feel, testing things like your resting heart rate first thing in the morning. These are good indicators that you can use to say like, okay, well, we're going in the right direction. Now, if you have been doing this stuff for a long time, recommended dose for most people, kind of more on the maximal amount would be around 3 hours per week. Personally, I do about 2 to 2.5 hours per week. I find that allows me to get a lot from my weight training, but being realistic with how much time someone has, that's essentially 2.5 training sessions, if you will. So I have 2 sessions that are an hour each where I do steady state, and I might have another session where we do 30 minutes, okay? So that's one way to look at it. Now, there is a point where you can start bleeding in to strength and hypertrophy gains, but I think the question really to ask here is, are you gonna be doing 5, 6, 7 hours per week? Most people in the real world are probably not doing that much. Now, I know there's probably some of you out there that might be endurance athletes. Maybe you're training for a marathon or an ultra marathon, certainly a different thing altogether. But I want to be very clear that this is more recommendations for general population people that are training, 4 or 5 times a week. Where can we put this into our program where it can have a big impact, but also be realistic? And that's kind of some, just general rules of thumb, if you will. Now, if you're thinking about when it should be done, I'm a big believer that you should do this on its own day. Aerobic metabolism is its own thing, anaerobic is its own thing. Weightlifting by nature is more anaerobic. Obviously doing what we're talking about is more aerobic. So having these things be their own session. So a good example would be, let's say you do 3 full body training sessions per day, full body strength sessions, your barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell work, and then 2 to 3 days a week, you do your cyclical, your aerobic sessions where maybe they range anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes a piece. Now, if that's not realistic for you in terms of how many days you commit to training, then you could certainly go with maybe 2 strength training sessions and 2 aerobic sessions or some variant of that. But just to give you kind of a place to start with, so we know that these things should really be their own thing. Now, oftentimes they get the question, well, I only have 3 days, what should I do? And here's a quick strategy that you can employ, and maybe this works out for you just based on only having 3 days. For 8 weeks, you can go with 2 aerobic days and 1 resistance training day. For the next 8 weeks, you can go with 2 resistance days and 1 aerobic day. And you can kind of go back and forth between those things. At times of high stress, you might want more aerobic conditioning. At times of lower stress, you might want more resistance training. And of course, you can use that to bias different qualities of fitness. If you want to bias gaining more lean tissue, then obviously biasing the resistance training will help. But needless to say, this is an incredible form of training that's going to improve your ability to recover. It's going to improve your ability to tolerate stress. It's going to improve how you feel outside of the gym, not just in your training sessions, but how you feel outside of the gym. And not only is it going to do all those great things, but it's going to help you live longer. It is literally the only form of training that will make you live longer. Now, you might be thinking resistance training, tons of benefits. Yes, there are, but if you want the biggest bang for the buck, have equal doses of aerobic work as you do your resistance training. Put the same level of attention to detail and effort into your aerobic work as you do your resistance training, and great things will come. That's it for today, guys. If you have questions, drop them in the comments. And remember, results are king. If you're an experienced everyday athlete and you're looking for the best training on planet Earth, check out my free training subscriptions. A 7-day free trial link is in the description.
Best program available on the internet today.
I think it's very difficult to find a trainer like Jason that...
Since joining Everyday Heroes, I feel like I've stopped working out and actually started training.